Hi, my name is Matt Fischer. I'm 52, currently married with 3 children. I was adopted at age 7 from South Korea, adopted by white parents in a small town in Michigan. What I know about my adoption is that my mother had kept me for a year and then apparently couldn't care for me for whatever reason, I don't know. I tried to ascribe the best reasons for that. And she dropped me off at some road near a police station, and some passerby heard me crying and took me to the police station. And from the police station, I went to a hospital, then from the hospital to an orphanage, and I stayed there until I was 7. I remember landing at the airport and seeing the Fischers for the first time with their daughter. They had a daughter who was, I believe, 8 at the time, and I was 7. That was their biologic daughter. And they had a Korean daughter who they had adopted 2 years earlier, who was about 3. And I remember seeing them and being, like, I wonder who they are. And that's the only real memory of my trip and meeting and coming to America. I never felt like I belonged. And part of that was because I looked different. And I would get teased in elementary school. They call me Jap or Chink or flat face. They always make fun of my face. I never really understood why. And they would call me, flat face Fischer. All these kind of things that, thankfully, for some reason, it never really bothered me. I just let it go. Part of it was because I was successful in school and the teachers liked me. I think kids need something that had their self-esteem. And my self-esteem was that I was doing well in school. And I learned English pretty quickly. I do remember going through speech therapy. They wanted me to lose my accent. Nowadays, they wouldn't do that. But I never felt like I really belonged. And there was favoritism toward the other 2 children and not toward me. I did most of the chores. I always used to say I was like Cinderella, So it did bother me. But again, like I said, I just hung my hat on being academically successful. They would say things like, if you don't do this, you don't do that, we're just going to send you back. And I've heard a lot of people have said that, have heard that from their parents. I'm trying to make sure I don't impugn them too much, but I think they were jealous of my academic success, and they actually prevented me from reading. They would take all the books away and say, you're not allowed to read. So I had to sneak books at night to read under the covers. And then I was a voracious reader. I just loved reading everything. And it got to the point where I was just reading the cereal boxes, the ingredients on the milk cartons, anything. And then they finally removed those from the table. And I was in honors classes and they pulled me out. And so there was a lot of, they didn't want me to be successful academically. So, part of the whole plan that I believe was, as a result of that, they transferred me to a different school to a private school, a private Christian school, because then they wouldn't be under the auspices of what the public school wanted. I think the public school was ready to do something to them and say, look, why are you doing this with your child? And so it transferred me to a private school. It was a small private school. It was a wonderful school, only 100 kids per class, a small Christian school. And they didn't have all the things that a public school could offer. For example, my senior year of high school, I had to take the same math class over again because they didn't have another math class for me. Between my junior and senior year of high school, I had already turned 18 because I was older when I came in, and they kicked me out. So they just said, we don't want you here anymore. You're 18. We don't have to take care of you anymore. And it all, believe it or not, stemmed from an argument, I believe, about filling out applications for college because they refused to turn over their financial information so that I could get financial aid. And for some reason, that's the one thing I remember as being the impetus. I was working at McDonald's at the time, and I ended up staying with one of the McDonald's coworkers in his basement for a couple of weeks because I had no place to go. And they kept my naturalization certificate, and I couldn't pay for school. I actually missed school, I believe, for about a week. I'd have to look back at some of the records. They probably have that. I did have a car that my grandmother gave to me. And so I did drive there to school and say I couldn't go to school because I don't have any way to pay for it because my parents had kicked me out. And they said, that's okay, just come to school, we'll figure something out. And so I came to school, and there was a classmate of mine, his name is Matt, ironically, and he had asked his parents, he knew what my situation was, and he asked his parents if I could stay with him during the school year so I'd have a place to stay. And they said yes, and I've stayed with him ever since. So here I am, 52 years old, and I've known that family for 34 years, whereas I've known the adoptive family for 11 years. So this new family, even though I was never legally adopted, has been my family for the past 34 years, and my kids only know them as their grandparents. They don't know anything about the Fischers at all. And so the new family took me in. They've been amazing people. Their last name are the Denos, so Bill and Sally Deno. In fact, my middle son, his middle name is Deno. And my new daughter, her middle name is Grace, because my mom, Sally Deno, her name is Sally Grace Deno. So we're trying to honor that family. I kept, so people ask me, why did I keep the name Fischer? And I seriously thought about changing my name back to my Korean name, okay, which is Chul-suk Kim, according to my adoption papers. But during this whole process, my grandmother Fischer was always very supportive of me. The adoptive parents refused to let me stay with her. She would have taken me in a heartbeat. But they said that if she took me in, they would disown her. And they were the only children of her. So she didn't want that, of course. And so, but even while I was living with the Denos, I would still go over to her house. She would cook me dinner. We'd play cards. And when she passed away, she left me money to go finish school, part of med school, be part of my wedding. And so I kept my name in honor of her, and will always do that. I've never had contact with the Fischers, the adoptive parents, since I left, and I've never had contact with their older biologic daughter. But the younger daughter, in fact, I've got her attached to MICA, which is the Michigan Korean Adoptee Association. Now, in retrospect, I think it was the best thing that ever happened to me. But at the time, I felt abandoned. I felt, what was going to I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen in my life. I felt bad for my grandmother. I have to say I wasn't necessarily missing them. I felt out of place because once I moved in with the Denos, I felt like I was a burden to them. Matt, who was their biologic son, interestingly in the same grade as I was. Talk about a dichotomy. He was the golden boy at the school, varsity basketball, varsity soccer, student council president, homecoming court. But the nicest guy, a guy who knew nothing about me and said, here's somebody who needs some help. And he has his parents. I think I called them Mr. and Mrs. Dano for a long time, but they were just so kind and nice. But being a Christian school, I think, my brother Matt, who was not technically my brother, but said to my parents, what would a Christian do? What would Jesus do? Take somebody in. And so I came in, and I thought this was going to be a temporary situation, that once I got to college, that'd be the end of it, and I would just be on my own and live my life on my own. But it turns out that back in those days, and I wanted to go to the University of Michigan and study engineering, back in those days, they wouldn't even take your application without financial aid information. So I went to a small community college. My grandmother, it actually wasn't a community college, it was a state college, but it was my hometown. My grandmother happened to be on a school board there. And so I went to school there for 2 years and I worked so I could file my own taxes for 2 years, and I could apply independently. I was very fortunate to get accepted in Michigan, and did chemical engineering. My first year there, I met this girl who is now my wife, and she, I was actually floundering in school. I don't know why. I think it was this freedom and this sense of living my own life. And I meet this Indian girl in biology class, and I said, "Hey, you want to go out?" And she said no several times, but that was the only one that I actually persisted, and because I knew there was something, I wasn't this creepy, like stalking her, because I would go to class, I would flag her down, and she would sit with me. So obviously it wasn't something that was terrible, and we ended up dating, and she says, you really should study. And she said, I'm going to go to the library. I'll be there every day, because she wanted to be a doctor. That was her dream since she was 7th grade or 7 years old. And she said, the only time you're going to see me, if you want to see me, will be in the library. So I had to go to the library and see her. And surprisingly, going to the library and studying, my grades went up. And as a result of her, I got into med school. We got accepted to the same med school in April, graduated in May, and got married in July, started med school in August. People say, wow, Matt, you did amazing. I'm saying, no, you know what? I have so many people that helped me along the way. I never feel like it was by my own bootstraps. Like people who do well sometimes because they have a lot of help. So I don't have that sense of there's something special about me that I did this. I had a lot of help. So I am appreciative of that. The Dentals just provided so much support and care and love, really. They've accepted me. They tell their family, they have 3 sons. I mean, it's like they took us on vacation, and they paid for it. They took me and my whole family, along with their 2 children and their families. They included us as part of that. My name is Matt Fischer, and this is my Korean American story.